screen okay? Awesome. Okay, thanks again and welcome everyone to today's conversation around AI. We're going to dig in and dive into the implications of AI and policy considerations that we should be making at the K-1 level. So again, this is a webinar that is brought to you by the committee that informs assessment policy for NCME. This is a select committee of individuals who are in the field of assessment at both K-12 and at the state levels, and some also seen other areas of the assessment world that really come together to inform assessment policy and considerations for NCME. So we're absolutely excited to bring today's conversation around AI because we know very well that it is a trending topic today in all fields of assessment. But today we are fortunate to be joined by two very respectable panelists in the field of AI. We are joined by Adam Gary, President of Strategic EDU Consulting. Gary, thank you for joining us. And then we're also joined by Maggie Bating-Parrish, a fellow at the Federation of American Scientists. And I am Dr. Elda Garcia, the Executive Director of National Partnerships for Imagine Learning, but I'm also a member of the committee that informs assessment policy, and I also co-chair the State and Assessment Local Leader Special Interest Group and the Large Scale Assessment Special Interest Group. So sitting in a couple of different areas there to try to help inform the conversation around assessment, having been a former K-12 assessment person responsible for assessment and accountability in K-12 for almost 20 years. That is a passion of mine personally, so I'm happy to be part of those committees and those conversations. So happy to help bring this conversation to you today. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Adam to introduce himself, and then he will kick us off on today's conversation. And then again, we will pause respectfully after each session to allow some open engagement around each of the presentations so that we can make sure we address as much as possible in regards to the burning questions you may have around AI. So Adam, please take it away. Feel free to share your screen and introduce yourselves to our attendees for today.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. And we just had an AI assistant join the meeting. That's a first. We don't see many of them just joining on behalf of someone else, it said, which was pretty cool. Hey, folks, I'm a former elementary school teacher. When I left the classroom, I got involved in comprehensive school reform that was really focused on project-based learning and technology integration in Title I schools, helping to shift from like teacher-centered to more student-centered learning environments. Did that work for a while. Built some PD stuff. I went over to Dell, was their first education strategist, and then I ran education strategy at Dell for 14 years up until recently, left and have my own company. I've been working around the country actually helping folks make that shift to utilizing generative AI more as a systemic change. So it's at the system level, working superintendent and cabinet, and we're building plans. In fact, tomorrow I'll be out doing policy guidelines and frameworks work, and I'll be doing a lot of that over the next several weeks and months. So a lot of information. I'm going to level set on some terms with everyone. But I also want to just start off by saying that I have a lot of respect for y'all that are doing work in the assessment field. Or someone came to my door, so they're going to go nuts. May 1 second. All right. I have a tremendous amount of respect that you all that are doing work in the assessment area. In fact, I've been reading some articles just this week on what Carnegie's trying to do with Indiana and some other states to really shift the seat time requirement so we could do a lot with assessment. But I'm not an expert in assessment, so I'm going to ask y'all to kind of think through what I'm teaching you and then bring the assessment. Hold on one second.
And while Adam kind of gets that situated, he's going to get us started with a general AI overview and an update on what is going on in AI and special consideration for K-12 in particularly. But we want to have this conversation around acceptable uses around K-12 and specifically policy considerations. So both him and Maggie will bring that forth. So Adam, before you kick us off, please feel free to finish your introduction. Then let us have Maggie introduce herself so we don't have to wait a whole hour before we hear from her. So.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. Yes, sir. And I certainly will not take an hour, Maggie. So you're being in good shape. Go for it. No.
All right.
So I'm Maggie. Sorry. I'm Maggie Biting Parrish, and I'm currently a fellow at the Federation of American Scientists. I was placed by the fellowship program with IES and CES, so I've been helping them do work with AI and data science, and both analyses as well as some work that hopefully will inform some policy. And I also started out as a middle school math teacher, but I've also taught preschool and undergraduates. And my initial teaching was at a Title I school as a New York City teaching fellow. So a lot of this work around equity, especially in fairness, as it relates to AI now, is a really important part of my work.
Excellent. We love that because equity is also another area of focus in regards to policy and now specific implications for AI. So, Adam, why don't you get us started and share your screens and give us kick us off with a little AI overview with kind of please weave in your experience with generative AI and implications that has for K-12 educators, students, the decision makers, and anything we should be considering at both the federal, state, and local levels because we're struggling with this at all levels of the conversation. So feel free to bring in any of that experience you've heard of in the field lately.
Great. I'm actually going to start with an activity for folks. We're going to use the chat as well, just to kind of drive home the power of these tools and how quickly we're seeing them progress. And then I'll dive into some of that. I also wanted to start with this because I want it to be interactive. I want you to all to use the chat. So the activity is you're gonna guess if this is a real person or an AI. And so this image was generated. And what I want you to do is go into the chat and just put in whether you think it's real or AI. I'm gonna watch the chat and then I'm gonna vote based on what I see showing up in the chat. Well, we see a lot of reals, a couple of AIs, a lot of reals. I'm gonna go with real. All right, let's see what happens. There was an AU in there as well. That's a new one. Nope, this was generated by AI. So we're gonna do 5 of these, and then I'll get your take to see if you want to keep going. I'll just let you know I did this over the weekend, and I was I think I might have got 2 out of 10, and I do this a lot. All right, what about this one? What do y'all think? Real. All right, a couple of AIs. AI swing it. No, we're going real. All right, let's go real. See what happens. AI generated. All right. Let's go to the next one. Real or AI. All right, a lot of AIs this time. Got assessment people on here. They're thinking you can't go 3 AIs in a row, right? Well, let's see what we got. Nope, that one was actually, let's see, this what did it say? Sorry. Nope, this one was real. All right, let's go another one. So far, we're 0 for 3. Some people are not. As an aggregate, we are. All right, what about this one? In AI, yeah, real and this was kind of split. I'm just seeing a lot more reals though. I'm gonna go real. See what happens. This one was generated by AI. All right, let's do one more. Real or AI. Real. Getting a lot of reals. Okay, let's go real. This one's generated by AI. Now, I have no idea. I can go through all of them, then it'll give you some hints. And I'll drop the URL in the chat for you if y'all want to mess around with this. But I mean, I was looking for telltale things myself, just to see like, hey, are these real or AI? Because early on they were pretty simple. Like sometimes they'd have 3 eyes, they were missing teeth, or the tooth was in the lip, But these things keep getting better and better. And so we're going to uncover a little bit about like how are they getting better and better and why and how do these things work, just so we can kind of level set a little bit. So let me just get this going and then I'll share my screen with y'all.
That was pretty incredible, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what folks are maybe in the chat if you can kind of chime in, but I certainly was really even when I was doing it this weekend, I just couldn't believe it was how many I was getting wrong for sure. So all of the talks that I've been doing recently, are very much focused on this idea of possibilities and risks. The reality is, especially in school districts today, many folks are very interested in this topic, but don't know where to start. Some of them are starting from a place of fear, which I completely understand, but others are just starting out with like Web 2.0 again. So it's like, oh, we're going to use all these tools, but really don't understand the implications of that. So I spend, usually about 3.5 to 4 hours on day one with folks, really helping them understand possibilities and risks. Obviously not going to do that with y'all right now, but I am going to jump into a little bit of, what's kind of going on right now in school districts, which is most school systems right now do not have policies, guidelines, or frameworks in place. They haven't had the conversation about academic integrity. They haven't updated their student code of conduct. They haven't talked about original work. They haven't rethought assessments. None of that has happened. And yet you have teachers and students actually using this technology, right? And so this point that we're at, you're starting to see articles. I saw an uptick this week actually of articles that are saying, hey, we got to do a little bit more in this area of policies, guidelines, and frameworks for school districts. They really need that. And it's really the focus of the work that I'll be doing over the next couple of months with some school districts. But just to level set, on what generative AI is, let's remember that what we're talking about, it's algorithms, right? And the algorithms are, creating not just text, as we just saw, it's images, it's code, it's video, simulations, right? And the back end of the text part of this, though, is something called a large language model, right? And so the way that the large language model works first is, and this is where it gets into fair use, and also you'll see towards the end of my presentation, there's things I won't go deep into because I know Maggie's going to go deep into, but I'll talk a little bit about this idea of what's going on with right now assessing writing, and some research that just came out this week around how these tools are not really great at it, and what we need to be thinking about. But the way that they're trained is very different from what machine learning does, right? So when you use something that's built with machine learning, essentially what someone's doing is saying, let's go back into a database and retrieve like a cat image, right? And bring it forward. The ways these things work is they have all of the internet. They've got Enron's emails, the internet, all sorts of things, books and articles, and they throw it into this model, and then they throw this training on top of it. And what comes about is this idea of a neural network, right? So you think of neurons in your brain, right, for specific things. What comes about in this are what they call parameters. And those parameters hold distinct pieces of knowledge or information, so that when you prompt these things and you ask them for something, they are predicting using those parameters in the model. So these are very, very large data sets. I'm going to get into what very large means in a second. But you should know it's not magic. So if you look over to the right, essentially when these models get trained over and over and over again on the text from the internet and these books, they can predict using semantics, right, and syntax, because you'll hear people say they're just large prediction engines. They're not just like out of context predicting things. They have seen that on the internet, these words used over and over and over again in certain contexts. And what they do is they say, okay, the next best word should be weapon, but they don't always choose that, because the way that GPT 3.5 actually became viable to release is when they put some randomness in how the word choice was actually selected by the models. And it's what differentiates the models as well. And so there's a certain amount of temperature that's built into each model. If it's sitting regular, it's 0.8. And at that temperature, it's going to decide, should I choose weapon, toy, latest tech? And that's how it randomizes the words that it chooses. So the underlying plumbing, when you're using ChatGPT, right, or you're using Anthropic or Bard or any of the models, Llama, that underlying plumbing on the text side is going to be a large language model, right? That makes sense. On the image side, it's going to be something completely different. On the video side, it's a different model. But they all kind of work in the same way, where they get lots and lots and lots of information. They're trained on that, but a human is not coding these machines. Let's say that again. A human does not code these machines. The model is being trained by the algorithms that were developed by these companies, which kind of helps us to understand why prompt engineering becomes a really, really important skill if you're going to get good things out of this. And the reality is that from a reasoning standpoint, you'll hear Sam Altman say this quite often, that these things aren't great at reasoning yet. And what he means by that is, if you're going to do a good prompt, many times you have to tell the tool step 1, step 2, step 3. If you're trying to get it to do anything mathematical, many times you have to say, show your work, right? And so prompt engineering is a key skill. And when I say very large, I'm sure people in this audience have a schema for this, but in many audiences that I'm talking to, they have a hard time understanding the difference between like million, billion, trillion. And so the way I break it down is say, like, if most people are on GPT 3.5, which is the free version, the paid version is 4. If you look at the parameters, remember neurons, right? You look at those parameters, there's 175 billion parameters in GPT 3.5, but in 4, there's 1.76 trillion parameters. So most people, can't grasp the size of that. So 1 million seconds equals 11.5 days. A billion seconds is 31.7 years. So it's a difference between a paycheck and a career. And then if you got into a trillion, you're talking about 31,546 years, right? So these are, like I said, very, very large models. And that's why you don't see a lot of companies, creating these things, because you need a lot of compute and a lot of data to actually make these things work. Now, the other side of this is you hear GPT. Yep.
I'm sorry, Adam, just real quick. This is super, super great information. Can you do me a favor and just share your other screen? Because right now we see the planning screen, so it's not maximized. This way we get the full effect, please.
Let me see if I do it this way, if this works for you. Is that better?
Yes. Well, right now I can, no.
It says Zoom quit unexpectedly.
Yeah, no, you're still here, but if you'll just try to share screen again and then share the other screen
Okay.
that you were on. So sorry to interrupt you, but it was just really, it really is going to be more effective if you have that maximized, please.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for breaking in and letting me know that.
I was looking for a comfortable spot.
Let's see. So this must be the one. Okay.
Yeah,
Is this the one?
Yeah, presentation mode. Yep. This is, well, if you'll just now run the slideshow, it'll probably be maximized completely.
Okay.
Yep. Now just start the slide presentation and we won't see your notes anymore. Although please feel free to share that presentation, including notes, and we'll share it with anyone who inquires.
Is that better?
No, so we're still seeing the planning side.
All right, hold on. Let me see if I do that.
There we go. Rock and roll, brother. Let's go.
All right. So what I would say it is like the GPT aspect of it. Think of Kleenex, right? Chat GPT was smart from a marketing standpoint. They call their tool GPT, but Bard is a GPT model, right? Claude is a GPT model. Llama is a GPT model. And all GPT means is generative pre-trained transformer. The generative means you're going to generate something new, right? Pre-trained is what I just taught y'all. It's trained on something, some sort of information. And the transformer piece actually was created by Google in 2012. It's really what kind of sent the generative AI field into motion. And a lot of the transformer piece is built on this idea of a neural network. I want to be clear though, like these things don't act like brains. They are modeled on the idea of a brain, but they don't think like a brain. They're not human. They don't have emotions. So just to be clear on that aspect of it, that T is built on that idea of a brain, right, of a neural network, but it is not a brain. And the reason I wanted to kind of teach y'all about how these things are trained is because this is a black box, meaning that because humans don't program this and say, I'm going to tell you to do this, and then you're going to do this, right? And then they just watch it and say, yeah, it's doing what I'm saying. we just have algorithms that train on these, on all this data. We know exactly kind of what we prompt, what we ask it, and we know what comes out the other end. We have no idea what's going on in the middle. And I don't know if any of you caught the 60 Minutes with Sundar Pichai from Google when they said that, there was 10% of a language they put into their model. A couple hours later, it had could speak 100% of the language, right? They didn't know how it did it. And that's part of the transparency piece that we're going to have to get into pretty close. And I've heard Sam Altman talk about that as well in the coming years, that these models are going to definitely have to be more transparent. So if we kind of shift a little bit out of, okay, what is the technology to what is the conversation that we're having as a society and then also with school districts is what are we going to automate versus augment, right? And there's always the fear, you're going to automate my job. And I think the reality is in education is that there's lots of things that we could automate and do for people that keep them from doing the critical thinking, the problem solving. And if you're a teacher, there's things that keep you from spending time with kids, right? And focusing on learning, focusing on assessment that we could automate so that we actually augment the teaching profession. And that's where we really need to focus as a society. And the reality is that 15% of all jobs that we do today can be automated. And in 4 years from now, next slide, in 4 years from now, 50% of those jobs will be automated. So think about a kid sitting in a freshman class today, even if they get the same jobs that we have, right? They won't do the job the same way, right? And so the other two things from the Future Jobs Report that's super important is that if you look at the world that we live in, those same freshmen will actually be graduating into a world that has 1 million more jobs in machine learning and AI, and there are 0 certifications for these kids to actually get while they're in school. So we got to fix that pretty quickly. And we also know that when they take these jobs, as I just said, the third highest priority for HR folks is going to be, can they use the generative AI tools? So at the beginning, there was a conversation about ethics, right, and equity. And I can tell you right now, I have this conversation with school districts all the time. Like if you start banning, you're not teaching kids and you're not figuring out ways to ensure that they know how to use these tools appropriately, you're not creating equitable environments for them when they leave your environment, when they leave the school district. Which then brings us into this whole idea of assessment, right? And the reality is, if you look at the screen here, these generative AI tools can do all of this stuff already, right? And it's not to say that we wouldn't have kids debate, right? It's not to say that we wouldn't have kids, do diagram labeling. It is to say, though, that when they're doing that, we have to be cognizant that they might be using these tools to help them with that. And we really need to extend what we're asking kids to do. And we need to be thinking about how these tools can help us assess these types of things. But, in the past, the whole idea was, well, we could just use AI to do predictive analytics on top of, test scores and quizzes. And it didn't really matter because these things weren't really good at doing things that were much more problem-based, right? We give kids a performance task and they do the work. Well, now we give them a performance task and it can even help them with those types of things. So, in our conversation today, as we're shifting that, assessment conversation, we should be thinking about how do we bring the tools along with us in the assessment arena instead of saying, we're going to create this, which was a paper from the University of Sydney. And they kind of called out this idea of lane 1 and lane 2 assessments. And in lane 1 assessments, essentially that's, you're going to bring kids into a classroom, they're going to do oral exams, they're going to do paper and pencil exams, they're going to do things that they can't even touch technology to do. And in lane 2, those are more of the human AI collaboration assessments. And they gave lots of examples of that in the paper. And I would like to see us really thinking through how are we getting to more of those lane 2 assessments. And let me stop sharing for 1 second because I want to make sure you all can hear this. And it's also important to kind of understand where the technology is going, right? So if you kind of look at what Google is doing with multimodal technology, this is exactly what let's see, don't send. Hold on, I'm gonna have to share again. This is exactly what where ChatGPT and all.
Tell me what you see.
I see you placing a piece of paper on the table. I see a squiggly line.
What about now?
The contour lines are smooth and flowing, with no sharp angles or jagged edges. It looks like a bird to me.
What if I add this?
The bird is swimming in the water. It has a long neck and beak. It is a duck.
Yes.
A duck is a type of waterfowl in the family Anatidae. Ducks are closely related to geese and swans. The duck appears to be blue. This is not a common color for ducks. However, there are some breeds of blue ducks. These are typically not as common as other duck breeds. It is more common for ducks to be brown, black, or white.
Are you sure?
What the quack? I was just talking about a blue duck, and now you're holding one. It looks like blue ducks are more common than I thought.
Would this float?
I'm not sure what material it's made of, but it looks like it might be rubber or plastic.
What if I tell you it's making a squeaking sound?
Oh, if it's squeaking, it's definitely going to float.
Nice.
It is a rubber duck. It is made of a material that is less dense than water.
Can you teach me how to say this in a different language? And give me a few options. Ooh, can you explain how to pronounce the Mandarin one? Is it Yazi?
Yazi is pronounced with a first tone. In Mandarin, there are 4 tones, which are essential to distinguish the meaning of words. The first tone is a high, level tone.
Oh, okay.
The duck is in the middle of the ocean. There is no land nearby for the duck to rest or find food. It is unlikely to find ducks here naturally.
Okay, based on what you see, come up with a game idea. Oh, and use emojis, please.
How about this? We can play a game called Guess the Country.
Sure, let's do it.
Clue 1. This country is the home of the kangaroo, the koala, and the Great Barrier Reef.
Oh, that's easy.
Clue 2. This country loves football and has won the most men's World Cups in football history. You are trying to get me to find the paper ball under the cup. I accept the challenge. The cup to the left.
Nice.
I know what you're doing. You're playing rock, paper, scissors.
What do you see now?
The fingers are spread out to look like the wings of a butterfly.
What's this?
Big ear and barking mouth, a dog.
Sweet.
The coin should be under the right hand.
I don't know.
The coin is in the left hand using a sleight of hand technique to make it appear as if the coin has disappeared. Both objects are round and flat.
There you go.
Both are food. The orange is a healthier choice than the cookie. Citrus can be calming, and so can the spin of the fidget toy. They are both examples of popular toys that have been enjoyed by children and adults alike for many years.
Give me some ideas for what I could make with this.
I see pink and green yarn. How about a dragon fruit? Or how about a green cake with a pink heart?
Okay, how about these colors? And maybe show me some animals.
Okay, now I see blue and pink yarn. How about a pig with blue ears? Or an octopus? Or a bunny with a pink nose?
Ooh, I'll keep those in mind. Which way should the duck go?
Going left leads to a duck, which is a friend. Going right leads to a bear, which is a foe. It is better to make friends than foes, so the duck should go left.
Smart choice.
This is a picture of a crab.
That's right. Is this the right order?
No, the correct order is Sun, Earth, Saturn.
Based on their design, which of these would go faster?
The car on the right would be faster. It is more aerodynamic.
Which looks more fun?
The one on the right, because it has a loop.
What do you think this person might be saying?
How about a woohoo?
Oh, I love that.
I see you're drawing a guitar. You've added an amp. Now it's an electric guitar. We can make some seriously loud music now. Given that you added drums, how about some 80s hair metal? Alright, I see you've added a palm tree to the drawing. Change it up with some beachy vibes.
What movie are they acting out here?
I think they are acting out the famous bullet time scene from The Matrix.
Ooh, nice. What do you think might happen next?
The cat is going to jump to the wall and stick the landing. It's going to be a perfect 10. Oh, and it's a miss. It looks like it was just a little too far away. But don't worry, the cat is a natural athlete and it will be back up there in no time.
Okay, I've got one more for you. Describe the drawing I made.
It is a simple line drawing of the constellation Gemini. You did a good job of capturing the beauty of Gemini.
Nice. That's it. I think we're done.
All right, so this is where the technology is going. And then Elda, I sent you one more link. I want you to show them the context in math so that they could see how this will now be applied to the assessment arena. If we could just pull that one up and show them, it's about a minute long.
It's for you and your team, not the other way around.
Today. In this example, they gave a worksheet with a bunch of math problems on it, and the math problems are already done with the handwriting and some of the work being shown, and they asked to essentially check the answers.
It can read the answers and understand what was right and what was wrong, and explain the concepts that need more clarification. So Gemini identified some mistakes with problems 1 and 3 here. Let's take a look at 3. Here, Gemini identifies that the formula was correct, but there was a mistake in calculating height. We can ask Gemini to explain in more details why the height is 50 meters instead of 6. I can ask Gemini to explain further. Here, Gemini explains the step-by-step details to solving the problem. Because of Gemini's ability to understand nuanced information, and answer questions relating to complicated topics, it can give you a customized explanation of the subject you're trying to learn.
Google also put up this really cool video on YouTube that shows all sorts of different ways that.
So the reality is that that's going to go to videos very quickly because it's YouTube. I mean, it's Google. So you could see how this multimodal kind of way of looking at math is going to change. Now, some people say they're not very good computation engines. Which is true, but they are getting better with each version that they actually release. So I can't screen share. I'm just gonna, there was a couple more things that I'm just gonna highlight for y'all, which is clearly we as a community, an education community, have to ensure that we recognize that bias is inherently built into all these models because of where the information comes from. And that model obviously is built because of the way the humans have created the information, but also how we prompt it. We need to be clear that right now there's a lot of lawsuits going on the idea of fair use, and we don't know where this is going to land. A lot of folks are saying it'll just land with money in someone's pocket, right? But these models have already started, and they're probably not going to tear them down. However, we need to be paying attention to how those proceed. School districts are very focused on cheating. What I like to point out is that if you look at the data that was just produced at a Stanford, it says that 60 to 70% of kids said they had cheated in the last year, and it's exactly the same as it was years prior, before they had access to these tools. Kids have just been cheating. So we need to figure out, why is that, and then enable these tools the right way, which is, helping school systems figure out what is human versus AI generated. As an important part of this, AI detection tools don't work. They're not very reliable. And just as we kind of move forward, the COPA language is it's under 60-day review right now. There's going to be changes to that. And a data controller in every district is going to be named, and that's going to be a very interesting thing to watch at the federal level as that makes it down to the states. There are 6 states now, and Maggie will point a couple of these out that have now created guidance documents. I created a GPT to go along with those now. So if a district or another state wants to create one, they could just aggregate from all those. There's a lot of similarities. And the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Maggie is this week I was reading a bunch of information and some research around this idea of school teachers feeding these models student writing and rubrics, and the fact that when they actually did the research and did the assessment, they realized that these models were not very good at assessing student writing and using a rubric. Some of that actually went back to just mathematical reasoning. The rubric says like 17 errors. They weren't even able to match back how many errors that the AI counted back to the rubric. And if this isn't trained on how a teacher actually scores kids, and it's just feeding it in with a rubric, we're getting varying levels of feedback to the student. And we really need to keep humans in the loop early on with this stuff before this gets better from an assessment standpoint. And with that, I will stop and turn it back over to Elda and Maggie.
Yeah, and we're going to share this presentation because clearly there's a lot to cover. And Adam, you gave some great examples to really kind of help us to wrap our heads around the power of AI. Before Maggie kind of takes over, you guys can still see my screen, yeah? Are there any, do you want to summarize kind of some of the guidelines and the policy kind of considerations that you left here for us, just to kind of give us an idea? And then we'll share the presentations for people to really dig in a little deeper. And then maybe we'll continue this conversation in future webinars. I think there's a lot to unpack here, but maybe you can leave us with some of the policy specifics, since that's the focus of today's webinar.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, policy specific, like I'm just going to be very transparent with folks. There's not a lot of policy. Unfortunately, what we have is a lot of guidelines right now. Stuff that coming from states, the AI toolkit, but nothing like concrete that says here's policy language, and you probably understand that for many, many reasons, but a lot of guidance for that. Let's see. Actually, Maggie, these are your slides too, if you wanted to just jump in on some of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely talk more about some of the AI policy that I have put in this presentation, but I also wanted to follow up and say that not only are sometimes these models difficult for automated scoring, but in fact, and the AI detectors only work so well, but in fact, they did a paper, and it's just as a preprint on arXiv, but they were showing that a lot of students who are English language learners, their writing, that's truly their own writing, is falsely flagged as AI generated. So also that's another example of like one, having difficulty building a detector, but also some more of this bias kind of getting baked in different places as well.
All right, so then Maggie, let's do this. Let's pause for a second to allow the audience to ask any questions of Adam before you kind of pick up where he left off and dig in to your slides. Are there any questions for the audience that we want to kind of pose given what we've seen so far from Adam? Feel free to unmute or pop them into the chat. Any questions? All right, then we're going to plow forward. Maggie, go ahead and feel free to share your screen. Hopefully it'll work for you. If not, then I will pull up your presentation, and then you can adjust from here. Oh yeah, we can see. Is
that the correct one, or is it showing you the presenter view?
Nope, the correct one. You're on.
Great. Okay, perfect. So again, just like before, if you jumped on a little late, I'm Maggie Biting-Parrish, and I'm a fellow who is embedded at NCES IES as part of the Federation of American Scientists Fellowship Program. And I do work around AI policy and do a lot of work around analysis of some of these different kinds of models, as well as data science in general. And a lot of my images I'm going to use today that are not somebody's logo are AI generated, just because I wanted to sort of show how, again, just like Adam, how some of these things work. So today I'm going to talk about just some general frameworks for thinking about policy. Just as Adam pointed out, a few examples of policy that already exist out there, and then we'll kind of talk about some of the sort of gaps and sort of areas of need to actually build a more robust set of policy for our, maybe out of MCME or around different kinds of assessment types. So here are some guiding questions here, and we'll kind of revisit these again at the end, and thinking about, yeah, again, like AI being used in context, and thinking about not only your context, but also the stakeholders who are being impacted by the use of AI, and then how can you write a robust policy that considers all of these people in in one sort of catch-all policy. So I started out this talk thinking about this idea of trustworthy AI. And this author just published this like 2 years ago. And this was intended more for just a broad policy around how to develop trustworthy AI, like for, business use and social use, as well as educational use. And this idea, again, of fairness is coming up again, and robust and transparent. You can read that for yourself. But when I read that book, it made me think about our standards that we have here at NCME as part of a joint effort with NCME and AERA and APA. And a lot of these things show up similarly. For example, like reliability is something that's important across both. Fair and impartial is something that comes across both. This idea of making your AI system transparent also shows up in the standards suggesting that we need to have scoring documentation, supporting documentation, things like that. So there is a lot of overlap already for our frameworks. I know a lot of people feel very overwhelmed about thinking about how to start AI policy for their particular product or their assessment framework. And a lot of your mindset, if you've already been thinking about the standards, as we all do in our work, a lot of it's already there. It's just called different things or it appears slightly in different ways. Alongside those two, this picture kind of always comes up a little weird, so sorry about that. But there's also this idea of human-centered AI. So we're in an educational space that's a little different than, an AI like you might get while you're shopping on Amazon that suggests the next product for you to buy. Oh, you bought this book, perhaps you'd like this book as well. This needs to be a little more thoughtfully designed and more with the humans in mind, because the consequences of education assessment using AI are more serious for the examinees, for the SAT, for example, or college admissions or scholarship opportunities and things like that. We're also, more of an adult learner for certification. So all those things that we do have real consequences. And Schneiderman has a whole beautiful book about human-centered AI, which I think is great if you're designing something new and policy around this. But they have the idea that ideally you should have high human control and high automation. So those are examples of things like elevators and cameras, so that way there's a good, like a still human in the loop, despite the technology doing most of the lift. So I'm going to talk about a few different AI policy examples, starting at more of like a national and federal policy. So just a few months ago, the Biden White House put out a sort of large sweeping executive order on safe and secure and trustworthy artificial intelligence. And again, this was intended for as a broad sweeping policy that affects AI for business and AI for social purposes and all kinds of things. That's sort of more of an umbrella policy as opposed to something that's directly about education. But they did focus a lot on standing up for consumers and especially patients and students. So context towards AI is being used for health or educational purposes. But also this idea, again, just like we mentioned before, this idea of needing to promote innovation and promote teaching and learning around AI and machine learning for our students, because just as Adam mentioned, we don't have a lot of programs in place to support this, but we need people on the ground to do this work. It's not clicking forward. Let's see. Okay. And then the one piece here that I just wanted to kind of pull out of the executive order here was just the idea of needing to shape AI's potential to transform education by creating resources for supporting both teachers with AI-enabled educational tools like personalized tutoring. And that's the only place to really touch on education specifically, but I think there's also lots of easy tangents you can build off of this to talk about assessment policy as well. A year before that, the White House also put out the AI Bill of Rights, and that's the Office of Science and Technology. And theirs was a little more broad. It's more of a call for what an AI Bill of Rights would look like. And they're focusing more on, like, again, safety and efficacy are important. Just like Adam mentioned, this idea that some of these algorithms can be discriminatory, and like, how do you protect against that? Again, this idea also that Adam mentioned around data privacy. If you put something up on your blog and then it's being used to train one of these large language models, and you didn't give permission for your work to be used to train these models, that's part of data privacy. If you're thinking more about students or patients, especially students are protected by FERPA. And so if their information is out there somewhere and it's being used to train a model, then that is a FERPA violation. So again, thinking about that too. And then also this idea of, again, explaining what was done, and then also thinking about human alternatives where possible. So overall, again, this is very broad policy, but it talks about the importance of thinking more deeply about automated systems that are for more sensitive uses. Again, education being one of those, and making sure that people who are using these systems are being trained properly, and also that some risk assessments are being done. And I'm gonna probably just skip through this, but they gave a couple different examples here, which are already being used. And this isn't even generative AI. This is just some of these more simpler algorithms. But one of these examples they had in the AI Bill of Rights was that a bank software was using machine learning practices, and the variable of whether the applicant for a loan had gone to an HBCU or not actually was predicting higher refinancing costs than somebody who had not gone to an HBCU. So again, there's an example of a discriminatory algorithm that is taking this variable and deciding to use it in a way that's not appropriate, and in fact penalizing people who have gone to an HBCU. Another example of this was also, again, another predictive model about student dropout, and they found that it was predicting that Black students were 4 times as likely to drop out, and that advisors and other sort of registrars and administrators were using this model to help steer students to or from different majors, and that they were tending to steer African-American students away from more serious STEM majors because they believed they would drop out based on this model. So already, these are not even generative AI like Adam was talking about. These are just very basic predictive models, and these are already being used in ways that are demonstrating that they are not thoughtfully designed in a way where they're free of bias, because clearly these are 2 examples of very biased results happening, again, in an educational context. So another policy that came out was also from the United Nations. And theirs, again, was a very broad policy about 2 years ago about not doing harm, making sure you're defining your purpose. Again, this idea of safety and fairness and data privacy, and also this human in the loop, need for human in the loop, as well as transparency and explainability. And again, this idea, what's interesting here is the idea of inclusion and participation, where people can actually choose to opt out or opt in for their data being used. And that isn't seen in most, so explicitly, it's not seen in many of these other policies. This just came out last year as well, and it's from the Office of Education Technology, again, at the federal level. And they had 7 different recommendations. And these are, again, for more broad use of AI, in the classroom, for students to use as a study tool, things like that. But the bottom recommendation there is this idea of developing education-specific guidelines and guardrails, which is what we're here to talk about today a little bit. And so when I went into that part of the report, there wasn't a whole lot there. It was more about suggesting that local districts and state level departments should be the ones doing the decision making, and they should also be thinking about this idea that we will have to adjust FERPA, SIPA, COPPA, and IDEA at some point with this work around AI, but there wasn't any specific guidance on what that's going to look like. But one thing that I thought was a really nice sort of image or thing to think about as part of this report is that they believe that AI should be used in the classroom more like an electronic bicycle, an e-bike, and less like a Roomba or automatic vacuum. So if you have a Roomba or any of its sort of similar types of vacuums, it just you just press the button and it just kind of cleans your floor as best as it can. Sometimes it gets stuck or things like that, but overall just kind of does its thing. Versus and it just kind of goes by itself. Versus the e-bike is still a bike that the human the pedals are, the electronic part supports the pedals, makes it easier to climb hills and things like that. But overall, the human is still in control of the e-bike. And so their idea from this policy was that we should be thinking about using AI in the classroom as a tool that just like you teach a kid how to ride a bike, you should be teaching kids how to use AI and how to be successful in the classroom, but not to the point where it's completely doing everything for you and you're no longer, you're using it more as a tool and not as like a sort of just, you'll do my lessons for me, Gemini, kind of a thing. So that's sort of their framing an idea about how they think policy should go forward around the use of these in the classroom. And then some presentation I went to around this report, somebody suggested the idea almost of like, just like in elementary, when students get their pen license, where they go from using pencil to pen, students would get their AI license and learn these basic foundational skills first, and then eventually, once they've mastered whatever the sort of foundational skills are, then they'd be given their like AI license and be able to use things like ChatGPT to support their learning. So I thought that was kind of an interesting idea of how to weave an LLM type based system into the classroom without making it sort of take over and remove some of the learning there for students. So turning more to state and district level policy, and as Adam mentioned, there aren't that many states that have these just yet, although I think a lot of folks are in process. Because again, the sort of the beginning of ChatGPT on a more public stage happened in November 2022. And so I think a lot of us have been kind of seeing where it was going to go. And then now there's the need to say, oh, it's just kind of staying around. And now we need to actually do some more sort of robust policy. But this policy just came out, I think, like a week ago, perhaps. And this was North Carolina. And they frame all of their work based on these 5 different pie chunks around leadership, human capacity, curriculum and assessment, data privacy, and then technology, infrastructure, and devices. So they want to make sure that before people are just using these in the classroom, that they should be evaluating these tools and making sure that they're looking and making and ensuring that it has the correct AI capabilities and also being aware of the limitations of different tools. Again, like we've talked about before, mitigating bias and also ensuring that students have privacy. That again, there should be some human in the loop, as well as if you're using one of these tools, there should be some evidence of impact. There have been some past examples of different tools saying they do one thing, but in fact, they do something quite different. And so it's important to avoid those if you're using this in a day-to-day classroom. And again, this idea of accessibility and inclusion. Some additional things to consider. Again, so many of these, again, it's a brand new technology, but so much of what's needed here is training, both for teachers like in PD to help them learn when they can use it and when it's a supportive tool, as well as, just like Adam mentioned before, being aware of what students are using ChatGPT or other tools like that for, whether it's cheating, whether it's writing part of their essay for them, and helping teachers kind of be aware of some of those things, as well as perhaps some strategies around what to do there. And again, so this policy has some of those additional things to think about, as well as also maybe some training for educators how to write better prompts. In New York City, where I live currently, initially they had, when ChatGPT first came out, they sent it to the list of websites you cannot access from a school-based computer, and it was removed for several months. And then they sort of reversed their policy actually in May of last year and decided to actually encourage the use of AI because they've started rolling out this computer science for all initiative where students are also working on computer science, and they've started building in the use of ChatGPT as part of their computer science for all work. So now they're also starting to build that in, as well as encouraging teachers and classrooms to celebrate the May 18th Day of AI, which includes some resources, and also encouraging that teachers should be talking about AI in their classroom, both how to use it as a tool appropriately and as well as the ethics of AI. And also California has one, and again, it's very similar. They actually do focus a lot on the social impacts of these systems, as well as they focus a lot on demystifying how AI works, not just for teachers and district level administrators, but also for the students and their families as well, just to help people to know what it is and what it is. And I think sometimes I talk to people in sort of the larger world about AI, and they think it's sort of magic. Oh, I typed in something and I got something back and it was amazing. And I think this is sort of seemingly seems like it can sort of generate something by magic, but in fact, just as Adam mentioned, it's based on these probabilistic models of how text is formed, especially when you have millions of examples and billions of examples of text to rely on. Turning more, so this is sort of a catch-all category here. So there's some nonprofit research, there's some for-profit, and then also some research we did at IES and CES. So Duolingo English Test is just like, some of you might use Duolingo to learn languages at home. They have a more formal product called Duolingo English Test that is an AI-based assessment where AI is used to score student utterances who are trying to speak English. And also there's some computer adaptive test elements of it where it adjusts the difficulty of the question based on the student's responses to the previous question. And so they also created their own set of standards. And again, it's very similar to what you see at the larger 2014 standards for our field. They have the same sort of larger categories here. There's also a nonprofit called the EdSafe AI Alliance, and their framework spells out safety, accountability, fairness, efficacy. Again, it's very similar to the Duolingo English Test one. And they are a nonprofit alliance that is working with, I think it's like 16 or 20 different districts to start building in more of these AI policies and AI learnings for these districts, including New York City, as working with them as well. So that's another option in terms of looking at some of their frameworks and research. I think Adam already mentioned this, but Stanford has their own human-centered AI center. And they just released this paper I think like last week, where they were taking out of the box LLM models and seeing how fine tuning would change the output of these models. And they found with just like 20 cents of training and as few as 10 harmful prompts or 10 harmful data points that they kind of fed in additionally to the model, that would disrupt a lot of the guardrails that the more public facing version of ChatGPT has. Including things like generating malware, which is not appropriate, or instructions for how to build a bomb, or it would, if you prompted it, it would actually give you back hate speech. And so they had this idea that fine-tuning an enterprise model can compromise your safety. And so they have this idea of needing more concrete policy on downstream mitigation. Perhaps OpenAI or other companies who are giving these models to people need to have like sort of like a, once your model is trained, here's this additional layer you put it through to kind of filter, some of these harmful things back out again. Or perhaps it's some kind of just at least some support around being aware that certain kinds of data that you train the model on might, in fact, take these guardrails down. So there's been a couple of different articles that have shown this, but this was the one that was the clearest about
Hey,
this.
Maggie. I thought what also was interesting is that when they tried to get it, to your point, to like forget and stop, producing the bad language or bad results, they couldn't get it to stop. And then this idea of forgetting, because I saw an article today in the New York Times on how some of these models are producing images that are very much copyrighted images, like the Joker, like it looks exactly like other images. And because there's so much training data of that picture, when you ask it to recreate it, it can. So they're trying to figure out ways to actually get these LLMs to forget things as well, which is kind of an interesting concept.
Yeah, definitely. So I think this one just, I think, came out like about a week ago or so. And so I think they're just kind of making people aware of this problem in a more concrete way, and then now trying to come up with a way to think about how do we now filter this back out, like you said, like forgetting, or is there like some kind of other modular layer we can kind of put things through that can, again, like sort of double check for this, especially if you're, training something based on like, hundreds or thousands of pieces of work. I mean, even for me, working with some of the NAEP data, sometimes students put in like their social media handles, or once in a while they put a curse word or something, and it's like if some of that data went in initially and you weren't aware of it, that could also change what you get going forward. So there's a lot of different things. It's a brand new field, and everything changes, I feel like, almost every single day. So interesting to see how quickly the field is moving all the time. And then just really quick talking about, so I started with at IES and CES last February. So I wasn't there for the fall 21 version, but I was there for the spring 23 version. And basically what we did is conducted 2 automated scoring challenges just to see if whether it was possible and feasible and accurate to have different kinds of machine learning algorithms scoring students' constructive responses. So the challenge that happened before I got there was looking at NAEP reading data. And the challenge was for the challengers to create item-specific models. So a model that scores each of the 20 items individually, and as well as one generic model where you could put any test question in, it would score it. And what was found was that overall, these innovations were as accurate as humans. But for this reading data, there was some additional bias observed over and atop, some of the bias that we see just in the way that human raters score students from some demographic minority groups like English language learners. But we found that there was additional bias observed based on standardized mean difference for English language learners and students with disabilities. So we're going to do some more work digging into that as our 2024 cycle. And then for the most recent challenge we just had, that was just item-specific models, because again, in the reading challenge, we found that generic models they were accurate, but not enough to where we felt comfortable using it as like an actual tool, or would feel like any one of those was comfortable enough to use as like a full-fledged tool. So this was just item-specific, again, 4th and 8th grade, and this was just the math responses. And these were a little bit more accurate even than the reading, but we think that might be because one, for the human-to-human ratings that were used to train these models, those were already very high agreement between the 2 human scores, because again, with math, it tends to be a little higher agreement just because there tends to be more than, only a couple of answers that are correct, whereas in reading, it seems like, there's a lot of different ways you can describe your favorite character or the main character or things like that. And we also found less bias by subgroup, but also there was less variation in scoring. So perhaps if there was a little more variability there, we tended to see that either the majority of students got a question right or wrong, and for most of these math questions, it was like 60 to 70% of students got a 1 out of 3 on these items. So I think part of the reason why we saw less of this, perhaps saw less bias, was because of this less variation in the scoring. But we're still working on some of these different things as we move forward here. And we also, but overall what we found was that in general, these can be used to score student work accurately and maybe more efficient than having humans score them all and then report the scores. In general, BERT or other large language models were the ones that were used for this innovation challenge. But the problem with that is that these are not transparent nor interpretable. And again, most of the policy that I shared with you guys before had some kind of language about being transparent or interpretable or accountable in some way. And so sort of one of the flaws here is that these are, just as Adam said, black box models, and there's thousands or millions of parameters being used, and it's really hard to trace back what are these high leverage variables, if any, or parameters, if any, that are impacting these scores. It's really hard to kind of go through and figure this out. There are some different methods now for looking at some of these, but unfortunately, none of these is quite pinned down just yet. We also need more of a formal best practice for evaluating AI models for the assessment purpose, because again, these are more serious than just an AI that suggests the next thing on Netflix for you to watch or the next thing to buy on Amazon. I mean, some of these exams really do impact students' lives, and so we have to be really thoughtful and careful about how we're developing these and how we're evaluating them. So some things to think about, again, as I kind of touched on before, across most of these different policies, across from federal all the way down to the more research level, there's this idea of needing fair, safe, and valid AI tools that are also developed with an accountable model building process, and also that the deployment process and post hoc evaluation process is robust and thorough and also well described. These policy considerations here that I was thinking about are more, I think, would be the most applicable to the use of like computer adaptive testing or the sort of intersection of computer adaptive testing and automatic item generation. Like I know there's sort of some research groups now that are working to almost create sort of like a bespoke test just for you, where all of your items would be items that only you really ever saw. And they would be distinct from somebody else who has at a different ability level or has different skills that they're better at than you. And so some of those, so that's a really interesting place for this field to go, but there are some things to think about when doing that. For example, if you're doing on-the-fly automatic item generation, there's a possibility of hallucinations, giving incorrect answers. So it's possible if you're doing a test that's a content-based test, like biology, for example, there's a possibility that if you're not testing this model carefully, there might be some hallucinations that lead the student to pick the wrong answer. Another thing to consider too is cultural representation, right? So again, a lot of the data that's training these models represents majority white culture. And so if you're generating items, a lot of times, there's already been some studies about this. A lot of times, if you ask for certain things, you tend to get sort of like the sort of more generic sort of majority white cultural representation or content about that. Again, as I mentioned before, automated scoring for some examinee writing and speaking may be biased against certain groups. There are a couple of studies that looked at the speech rater system, which is a system that evaluates English language learners' speech. And they found that certain, depending on what your original first language was, the system might be more or less biased against you. Another thing that's not really in any of these policies as much is this idea of cost and environmental impact. These models are very expensive and also cost a lot of electricity. And now we're sort of in this space with climate change and things like that. It's, does this task or does this application really merit spending, thousands or millions of dollars and thousands or millions of kilowatt hours to train? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, and that's something to kind of think about. This idea too of psychometric modeling, especially if you're creating these tests that are sort of bespoke to the student. Again, as I mentioned before, the need for explainable and interpretable models. And also this idea of needing some sort of post hoc tools to understand scoring anomalies, if they're the result of the item, maybe the way it was generated wasn't correct. Maybe it's the way that the system is scoring you, if you're using machine learning based scoring tools, or if there's some kind of intersection between those two things. Maybe there's just some sort of item that the machine learning scoring part does not accurately work with. But also I was thinking about this idea of assessment as learning. I think that these tools really do give us the possibility of giving students sort of up to the minute information about, here's your 30 questions you just took a test on, and here's the ones you did well, and here's the ones you did poorly, just like Adam showed us, where almost immediately you could get sort of like a tutoring right after you took the test. Oh, you missed questions 4 and 5, here's how you do them. And so it'll be a really good learning opportunity for a lot of our students as part of the assessment process. This part's more about pedagogy, but this idea again of like data source and literacy, just like Adam showed with the AI generated pictures at the beginning, there's a lot of pictures of deep fakes. There was just this news article this week about, I think it was New Hampshire. They had this deep fake Biden automatic generated voice that was not actually Biden, but was calling people and telling them not to vote in the primaries if they were registered Democrats. So again, that's like an example of a deep fake where it's really impacting people's life and really impacting, things like elections, which are really important. If students are using ChatGPT or other tools like that to use as a study aid, again, there's a possibility of like hallucinations, and that might impact how you're learning. Again, as we mentioned before, plagiarism, and also the need for AI curricula. So again, this is sort of my last thing to think about. It's just some missing policy considerations and things where we need to build things around, more guidelines around this. This idea of helping to mitigate bias, one of the ways to do that might be accurately and thoroughly representing different demographic groups in the training data set. Again, a big part of why we're seeing sort of these biases is because the majority of the data that it was trained, most of these models were trained on, represents white majority culture. And so ensuring that enough training data is built in that represents other cultures. Again, the idea of environmental and financial cost model building or model evaluation. This idea of sort of like a risk assessment and how to build that in. Is this new innovation really useful and important, or is there an existing tool that we can use or can kind of beef up or improve? Also, this idea, we need sort of like a more best practices for model development in assessment around and making sure we have steps and supports for both data cleaning, model building, and then post-hoc evaluation. We need to set some actual like thresholds for model efficacy and fairness. And then again, none of these policies really talk about, is there a consequence for violating the guidelines? And those guys, for some of these, again, as I said, if you're recommending like tools or new things to buy, the consequences of violating that probably are pretty low. But for this, if you're using some kind of AI tool for education purposes and you're, say, selling students data to better market toys to students or things like that, that's a huge violation of student privacy and also accountability for what the model is actually doing. And is there some kind of consequence or follow-up for how you address those violations of people's trust in these models? So with that, I'll stop there. But if you have any more questions or things, or you want some of these resources, I have all of those listed as a slide, and I can certainly share that with Elda, and we can certainly get that to you guys. So.
Yes, thank you, Maggie, for that. And just as an additional kind of like, I guess, an additional piece of information to what Maggie has added. Can you all see this link to the Los Angeles website? Okay, so this is the website for the Los Angeles United School District. Maggie referenced it along with, I believe, North Carolina, but this is a really good example of a K-12 leader in the space of AI. Los Angeles Unified has committed a lot of time in this entire division to, and then this instructional technology initiative to address the issues surrounding AI. So I shared the link in the chat for you all to review and peruse on your own time. But this is really a good example of what they have shared in regards to AI to address the challenges that some that Maggie has addressed and Adam has shared in regards to concerns around privacy and security and community issues. LA Unified has included there some communication pieces that they've shared. There are some facilitators guides. This policy development piece is very, very interesting here. It absolutely takes you through the steps that they've taken to create board policy around the use of AI. So this is a really good guide, and not only for other K-12 districts to model their policies after, but for us on the other side of NCME, the researchers and the test designers and developers to review and be familiar with as they create the actual assessments themselves, because some of those implications will roll over into that. These policies are in the general use of AI. And so, but assessment is going to be sure to follow. I mean, right now we're trying to wrap our heads around how we can safely use this in the classroom, how we can address the concerns that we have and really embrace this opportunity for advancement from a technology standpoint. Now, Maggie talked about how we can use this to personalize instruction. We're already on that tick to try to use formative assessments as a way of having real-time data faster, more accessible, and actionable. If AI is the next step to that, then we have to wrap our head around all these implications and concerns and prepare for those anticipated challenges as we embark on those opportunities. So this is really just a good reference and some training kind of presentations of what LA Unified has done. That is really, in my opinion, a very good example of what is potentially available out there in the K-12 space. Not potentially, it actually is available already for LA Unified. But like Maggie said, these are few. You know, there are many school districts that have done it, but not nearly all of them, right? And so LA Unified and North Carolina, the other examples we shared, are good models of those policies that address some of these concerns, implications, considerations. So I think it's good for us to really, as researchers, try to utilize these resources to bridge that research and practice as we try to see where assessment's going to fit in this landscape of AI and K-12 education. So I was this close to having Sophia Mendoza, who is the director of that LA Unified department, join us, but her schedule filled up quickly. But maybe we can, tap in. I mean, if we have any questions, we can continue the conversation by way of future webinars. But we do have about 10 minutes. If anyone has any questions to Maggie about what she just shared for us, or for Adam, as we kind of wrap up this session, for us to consider now, or future considerations for topics and continued conversations moving forward. Open to the floor. Feel free to unmute your mic, your camera, or pop them into the chat, whatever you would like to engage in some questions and open conversation. We can address the crickets if no one else has anything. Donna, do you have a question? Or you just kind of popped in and out?
Yeah, I was just going to say, wow, I'm just really impressed with the presentation today. Thank you so much to the presenters who have shared a wealth of really, really good information, and appreciate the LA Unified information. As a school district out there right now, we are entertaining this conversation at a board level. And grappling with policy development, and know that we do need to move on it because we can't wait, right? So, and as you all said, it's being utilized currently, and we've got training set up for our staff, and so this is a really relevant topic, a really important topic, and I think there are a lot of inherent risks. However, I don't think it will be wise for us to hold on to old established ways. I think we will be compelled to embrace this and to really get moving on it. So thank you, Elda, for putting this together. Very helpful.
Absolutely. I appreciate that, Donna. And I think that all that you have said is really the reason why we put this together, is because we're going to have to find a way to move with this next evolution in technology, because it's going to move whether or not we prepare or we embrace it. It's going to happen, and so we certainly don't want to get behind kind of that kind of progress. And technology and education typically is kind of the last to kind of move with the movement at large. And so open industry and other kind of professions are already really kind of digging deep on how they can maximize the benefits of AI. Us personally as professionals, we're using it to help us, type speeches, type, presentations, things that are not copyright kind of sensitive. And there is an opportunity to be able to kind of lean into those opportunities for K-12 education and ultimately, hopefully, assessment. But there are other aspects to consider. What are the implications for assessment designers? Well, for those that are the statisticians analyzing the data on the back end, and those K-12 people like you and I that are in the thick of it administering those tests. What are the implications for those kind of advancements, and how do we get ahead and move right along with this kind of rapidly changing climate? And so I think it's important, and that model for LA Unified is a good example for you to kind of take forward. Sophia Mendoza wanted us to make sure that we knew that those resources were available to any district who wants to kind of customize to meet their specific needs, because we have a real opportunity here to be able to create a way to be able to maximize the benefits of AI in a way that is safe and responsible and beneficial and high impactful. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. So hopefully today's conversation and presentation is helpful. I have already, excuse me, sent the presentation to a couple of people who have emailed me to request it. So again, my email address is in the chat. If anyone wants me to email them directly, I'm happy to shoot the PowerPoints over to you. And the recordings should be available on the NCME website and or the YouTube channel. So I will, again, mine is Elda Garcia. I'm gonna tap it in here. Elda Garcia at imaginelearning.com. At the risk of getting 89 emails, I'm going to share that again, and I will be happy to send that to you while we NCME figures out a way to get it to the entire registration list. So if there are no other questions, I want to thank both Adam and Maggie for taking the time to join us today. This information has been powerful. It's been very beneficial. Throughout your entire session, people have been commenting how the important this information is to share, and how they want to have access to this information and by way of PowerPoint. So we'll do what we can to get that to you. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have additional conversations, additional topics that you would like us to consider on the NCME front in these special interest groups and otherwise. And we're happy to help us kind of pull together the people and the champions that are in the field to bring us the information and the latest and greatest that we have to consider. So thanks again for joining us on behalf of the committee informing policy for the NCME assessment group. We thank you for joining us, and wish that you have enjoyed the rest of your day.